think it's great. He deserves to go free. They had no evidence on him.
So much evidence to deliberate for as short as they did and come back with a not guilty verdict. I think it shows the jury was pretty irresponsible. Money can buy you justice, exactly.
I think the jury sent a message that the time has come here in Los Angeles and in America that indeed there must be a level playing field for everybody.
And I'm just don't think justice was served. I don't think the jury did their job. I think they knew what they were going to do from the gate. I think it was racist based and it was racist from the black point of view.
And I think that this is terrible that he's going to get away with this, because I do believe that he did it. And it's just not fair.
He's guilty. He's got to live with himself, man. He knows he did it. DNA is not racial. It doesn't see black and white.
Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publicists Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, we discussed the case that still cuts deep into the heart of America's racial divide. The trial of the century was a trial that captured the nation's attention, exposed the racial fault lines in our justice system. No, we're not here to litigate or relitigate this case, but we're going to talk about how this isn't just a trip down memory lane. It reflects how far we've come and still have to go. It's about all the white noise that comes with race discussions and other subjects in America. When O.J. Simpson was acquitted on October 3rd, 1995, the cheers that erupted were not just for O.J. Simpson, but mostly for Johnny Cochran's masterful dismantling of a justice system tainted by racial bias. Cochran's defense wasn't just about O.J. Simpson. It was a scathing indictment of a system that had long treated Black defendants as guilty until proven innocent. The trial came on the heels of another pivotal moment in American race relations, the acquittal of the white police officers who brutally beat Rodney King. Despite clear video evidence of the officers' excessive force, they were acquitted, sending a chilling message that Black lives could be brutalized with impunity. After being stopped for failing to yield, for those who don't remember, Rodney King found himself surrounded by over 20 armed Los Angeles police officers, several of whom proceeded to beat him half to death while he was lying defenseless on the ground. King was hit between 53 and 56 times by officers wielding their batons, the bones holding his eye in its right socket, as well as those at the base of his skull, were broken. In addition to clubbing him wildly, one officer, Tom Brasino, stomped on King's head. The question before the jury was simply whether the force used to subdue Rodney King, up to 56 baton blows, which included blows to the head and the stomping on King's neck, nearly all of which occurred while he was unarmed and prone on the ground. The question was it reasonable? The jury found none of the officers guilty. These cases were not isolated incidents, but symptoms of systemic racism that permeate every level of our justice system. They expose the double standards, the stereotypes, and prejudices that shape white perceptions of Black bodies, perpetuating a cycle of fear, mistrust, and injustice. It leads us today to talk about why a predominantly Black jury could not find O.J. Simpson guilty of double murder. As one author boldly stated, Blacks and whites live in two different worlds. The O.J. jury had seen a great deal of police brutality and misconduct in their community. They knew the police planted evidence. Therefore, they were rightly skeptical of police evidence. The jury perceived some cops Many cops don't like Black people enough to cause a reasonable doubt about the evidence. In psychology, the principle of cognitive dissonance states that when people absorb new information conflicted with what they already know, they integrate it into pre-existing attitudes and beliefs. Some say the principles helps explain the decision of the O.J. Simpson jury. But consider these divergent views of what's supposed to be a common reality. Some claim that the insurrection on January 6, 2021, was the result of a racist demagogue. Others claim that it was a lawful patriotic protest. Some say racism remains a pervasive problem for many non white Americans. Others have the audacity to say white Americans are the primary victims of discrimination. Some say America is a nation of immigrants who bolster the economy and reinvigorate the country. Others say non white immigrants bring crime and are poisoning the blood of our nation. If there's a phrase that captures this dual inversion of America, it may be alternative facts. Remember that phrase? It entered the American lexicon in 2017 during an exchange between Kellyanne Conway, who was a senior advisor to Trump, and an NBC journalist. When the interviewer pressed Kelly Conway on a false White House claim about Trump's inauguration drawing the largest crowd ever, she responded that Press Secretary Sean Spicer had given alternative facts. But 20 years before Conway, Simpson's trial had already revealed the potency behind such reasoning. No matter how much overwhelming evidence you have, there are always alternative facts. The prosecution in the Simpson murder trial thought their case was a slam dunk, with strong forensic evidence tying Simpson to the killings. Well, it didn't matter. There were alternative facts. Before there was fake news, there was fake DNA. What started in that Los Angeles courtroom has now spread throughout America's political and pop culture. Seeing isn't believing anymore. Is that video real or is it a deep fake? Did that student write that term paper or did AI generate it? Is that a person friending you on social media or is it a bot? O.J. Simpson gave us a preview of an America in which it's becoming harder for anyone to believe their eyes or ears. It's no wonder that so many people followed the news of that solar eclipse. It was a rare experience where millions of Americans witnessed the same event, and few, though not all, talked about alternative facts. Black Americans have long viewed the justice system as rigged, but now millions of white Americans claim to share the same view, thanks in part to Donald Trump. The former president is facing, of course, 4 criminal cases, one underway already in New York City, and 88 felony charges. He has pleaded not guilty to every single charge and claims to be a victim of corrupt prosecution. And he still has millions of white supporters standing behind him. About 85% of Republican voters in 2022 midterms were white, though there are signs that he may be attracting more Black and Latino voters. This morning, though, we are going to dive into these issues, confronting the uncomfortable white noise and the realities of African Americans and the American justice system. We got an all-star panel. Lauren Burke is with us. Rashonda Tate is with us as well. Katia Woods. And, of course, Takuma is with us from the Chicago Defender. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All, Takuma, look, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to give way to the ladies. Now, again, we're not going to relitigate whether somebody believes he's guilty or somebody believes he was innocent. It doesn't matter in 2024. But what matters is, as we talked about, the lead up, the atmosphere, how that trial changed America. We saw in the lead up to the program, as Greer showed the archives, you had a white woman claiming racism. I mean, the atmosphere was such that the trial. Well, I'm gonna let you talk about the atmosphere.
I think you were right to, in your eloquent roundup, providing the context of what was going on at the time in the early to mid 90s, particularly in Los Angeles. In that timeline, it's appropriate to include the beating of Rodney King in 1991, which I believe is a closely, as you stated, as you inferred, is a closely related phenomenon to what we experienced in 1995 with the O.J. Simpson verdict. And again, pointing out that when those cheers erupted among Black people, they were certainly not really about OJ, who really wasn't down with us. It was about finally experiencing and being on the right side of a verdict that has long been discriminatory against us. And I think what Rodney King proved is that you can have an atrocity happen before your eyes, but the justice that comes with it is often not appropriate. It's not just. And in here, OJ represents an inversion of that.
Yeah, and Lauren, you wrote for Black Press USA under the headline "Football Legend O.J. Simpson Dies, but the Obsession Remains Alive." And one of the things that you mentioned was a pivotal point in the Simpson trial came with the realization that one of the detectives in the case had made racist statements in the past. Um, that obviously we know was one of the biggest turning points. Bring us back to that time when Mark Furman was exposed for what he was.
Well, Mark Furman, who was a police detective for the Los Angeles Police Department, of course, was forced to plead the Fifth Amendment upon being asked whether or not he planted evidence. That kind of was the the deal breaker right there. If you're
Right
pleading,
there.
you're pleading on that type of a question. And basically, what happened in the case was that, really, I think for the first time in America, you have a Black defendant on trial who has the resources to defend themselves in a way that white folks have had for years. So he had really the best legal team that anyone has had, I think, ever. I can't think of a case where you had more attorneys that were acclaimed at the time. Barry Scheck was just starting out as a forensics expert, a
And
well-known
DNA was
forensic.
new.
Yeah, he was right when DNA was new. And of course, he goes on to found the Innocence Project. He was young then, and he was a part of that team. And of course, you had F. Lee Bailey, who was at that time a prominent trial attorney. And of course, you had Johnny Cochran. There's not to mention the others, Robert Kardashian and the others. I mean, you had a five-person team that frankly just outmatched Chris Darden and the team that was, of course, acting for the state. So right there, you had something unprecedented: a Black person who's a defendant in a murder case, a double homicide case, that has the resources to defend themselves. That's unprecedented right in itself. Then you have the fact that we in America, and I think white folks just don't appreciate this because we just don't teach it in school, and to the extent we do teach it, they don't generally care. We have a history in this country, certainly, of extrajudicial justice pointed directly at the cohort that O.J. Simpson is a part of, which is Black men. That extrajudicial justice has involved murdering Black men at the rumor of crime. Forget about having a
Mhm.
case or anything else. At the rumor of crime that had been going on for centuries. Nobody has any appreciation for that. And of course, on
Right.
top of that, you had what you'd already mentioned, which was the Rodney King case happening in the same vicinity of that time. We know contemporaneously that people get away with murder all the time. I happen to think that OJ did do it. I think he did murder Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. They had me at the Bruno Magli shoes at the scene. Basically, it was very hard to plant
Which
that.
happened to have been a find by the National Enquirer of all people, found the
Exactly,
photo
exactly.
of him wearing those shoes after denying that he never owned a pair of those ugly.
Exactly. So, I mean, you knew that something had happened. He'd had a history of violence with Miss Brown, and so that was all out there. But at the same time, we as African Americans are used to injustice, and white folks are just not. Okay, we're used to hearing that George Zimmerman gets away with murder, but killing a teenager with some Skittles and some iced tea one night because he just has to approach him and pretend that he's a cop, which he is not. We're used to Byron de la Beckwith. We're used to all of these things where white folks, have gotten away with murder over and over again, decade after decade, and really century after century. White folks are not used to that. So when OJ got away with murder, they all flipped out. I happened to be at ABC News in the first year of ABC News, people crying in their offices, hysterical, all of this. And I'm sitting there going, we as Black people have heard this a million times. Y'all need to relax. Okay. Just because it happened once for us, and it's, I mean, once for you, and it's happened thousands of times for us. I mean, that to me was sort of hysterical. But I'll stop there and listen to everybody else.
Yeah, I want to go, Rashonda. And one of the several things Lauren mentioned there was the whole domestic violence thing. That's the other thing that seemed to have changed with the O.J. Simpson case. The recognition of domestic violence. That's really where Mark Furman comes in as well, not with just the planting of the or the alleged planting of the glove, but even with the domestic violence, Mark Furman had a history with OJ and Nicole and domestic violence calls. But before OJ, we didn't seem to, when I say we're talking about the greater public and the media itself as well, didn't seem to pay a whole lot of attention to domestic violence.
Well, again, they're paying attention now because it's a beautiful white woman who was abused, and it's just like when it comes to the missing girls, attention was paid because this beautiful white woman's life was taken. And that's not to belittle anything, and take away from the tragic murder. But I think, again, like Lauren said, we had gotten to the point where we were immune to this type of stuff, but now a national light is being shown on it. I think OJ's death just reminds us of the realities of race in America. We really didn't. I don't think that anybody was like, I'm down for OJ, whatever, It was about the balancing the scales of an injustice system. And I think the domestic violence issue kind of got lost in all of that, trying to empathize with the reasons why so many Black people felt this way. It was substantial 3 decades ago, and it still is. For many Black people, the acquittal was a matter of justice according to a different principle, weighed on a different scale. And I think the domestic violence issue just kind of got brushed under the rug.
So interesting, Katia, with the case there and with how America, OJ was one who never, and Black people say this all the time, and it's true. I mean, I don't know a different way of saying it, but he never claimed his Blackness until he had to. He never, he was put in a position where we knew, and if you look at the documentaries, even not even looking at the documentary, look at his history, his life. It was a guy who refused, like other athletes, his peers. I'm talking about Jesse Owens and Muhammad Ali and others who stood for the cause, who was outspoken for the cause during the height of their careers. OJ declined. That wasn't his fight, he said. That wasn't his thing. Really, the Black movement wasn't his movement. But it's really interesting how during that trial, Katia, if you recall, when they took the jurors to OJ's home, how Johnny Cochran orchestrated the, as Greer and I was talking about, the code switching. They orchestrated the putting up Black photos that Black folks would have. They changed out all the white photos. Talk about that a little bit when you have celebrities like O.J. Simpson who never claimed his Blackness, but when that time came, that Blackness worked for him.
What's the famous quote he had? I'm not Black, I'm OJ. I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, he lost a little bit a sense of reality. He thought money could erase, or his Blackness would have people see him for him. And then, this awful event occurs, and he found out just how Black he was. You know what I mean? Because all his quote unquote white friends were like, "We good," you know what I mean? The people in the neighborhood that he lived, they didn't want him living there. They didn't want to be associated with him anymore. All the invites ceased. So he found out real quick how Black he was. And, I mean, that was his get out of jail card, for him to claim his Blackness. And it was due to Black people that he was, he had a fighting chance. Because if he didn't have Black people, he would no doubt would have went to jail, and he would have died in jail. That pretty much. So
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too, we saw, and I think it was touched on a little bit, but let's go more into this. Takuma Lauren, um, um, the prosecution spent something like $8 to $9 million prosecuting him. I believe it was 800,000 a month is what the price tag was. But O.J. Simpson, excuse me, his bill came up to 6.5 million. And why is that significant? Well, one of the problems that African Americans have historically faced with the justice system, as you know, Takuma, is we can't afford to fight it. The resources for a prosecution is almost endless. OJ was able to do that. Could you talk a little bit about his position, uh, financial position, to be able to do that, and how big was that? Oh, he's
Was
on mute.
I'm on mute. Oh,
There
oh,
you go. There
sorry.
you go.
I think one of the things that isn't talked about enough is again, and I think people have lost this sense now that we're decades removed from that era of OJ and the trial, is what he was at the time. If you could put it in context of today, it would be as if a famous athlete, it would be as if Shaq were on trial. Back then, because that's how big OJ Simpson was. You talk about a former athlete who was very successful with his run with the Buffalo Bills, one of the best, enjoying one of the best seasons ever, 2,000-yard rusher, to someone who's been able to ingratiate himself into Hollywood society, and have this amazing career, first as a pitchman running through the airport for a car rental commercial, to starring in these movies that were really popular, especially the comedies that I'm thinking of, the Naked Gun series.
Yes.
So you had somebody with an extraordinary life who was far removed from the realities of what Black people had faced in South Central when he was in Brentwood, California. Um, and so I think that's part of it. The ability to have those resources to be able to assemble, as it was mentioned earlier, this all-star legal team. When for us, unfortunately, when it comes to the criminal justice system, a lot of people's realities are closer to what occurred with Khalif Browder as opposed to O.J. Simpson.
Yeah. Oh, without question. And Lauren, you mentioned um, the Mark Furman situation. That's that. But there's another example of having the resources, right, to be able to go out and get a private investigator to be able to uncover these things. Correct?
Absolutely. And remember that Alan Dershowitz was like a backbencher on that team. I mean, when you have Alan Dershowitz as somebody who's a secondary attorney sitting there, and Robert Shapiro and Johnny Cochran, of course, was really acting as the lead in that situation. But I just would say again, I can't think of another case offhand, whether it was a celebrity or not, where you had a stronger legal team. And of
Hmm.
course, the way our country works is you have a right to counsel, but it's the counsel that you can afford. And a lot of these jurisdictions around the country, legal defense that is provided for free is not very good. And for cases that are capital, crimes and felony crimes. So that defendant is at a huge disadvantage against the state. And quite frankly, what happened in this situation was that Marsha Clark and Chris Darden could not keep up with F. Lee Bailey and Johnny Cochran and Robert Shapiro and Robert Kardashian and Alan Dershowitz. They just could not keep up with these guys. They just could not. It was a simple fact. You could see it in court. They made huge mistakes. To this day,
Hmm.
Alan Dershowitz, who had a book out on this entire thing, of course, brings up some of the huge mistakes they made. The glove mistake was massive because
Oh yeah.
apparently they could have had OJ behind the scenes trying the glove on or not trying the glove on to see whether the glove fit before we got out on stage during open trial. They made the big mistake of having all that happen in open trial. Johnny Cochran, of course, knew what he was doing. And Johnny Cochran had more years of experience as a trial attorney, I think, than anybody in terms of years in court. And it showed. And so OJ was able to get away with a double homicide, which is a serious thing to get away with for anybody, black or white. A double homicide. in a jurisdiction that is moneyed. This is Los Angeles. It's not like some small, town in the South. And it happened. And frankly, the system worked as it would have worked for a white defendant, which is why I think everyone got crazy, because that wasn't supposed to be how it's supposed to work. How it's supposed to work is we are supposed to declare, we the majority are supposed to declare that you're guilty. We see this all the time, by the way, with certain social movements that are going on as well. I think about Me Too when I say this. I mean, we're at a point with Me Too where it's almost like I get to declare you're guilty without trial, without evidence, without even really a conversation. And the media sort of plays in this as well. And if you know anything about media history, which I know, Stacey, you do, the media history behind lynching and Ida Wells and everything else really goes to this idea of I get to declare your guilt without any process whatsoever if you're a Black defendant. And OJ's case really blew that up completely, because it really ran through the legal system the way it should have, and the way it would have for a white defendant as well. And for a lot of people, that was a culture shock, which of course it is.
Well, yeah, it was indeed. And Natalie Ferrier is writing, is asking, did Mr. Cochran have to blackify OJ's home? Yeah, we talked about that. Certainly, that was a one of Johnny Cochran's MOs. He knew exactly. He read the room. He absolutely read the room. Katia, so we have this legal dream team, cost $6.5 million or so. Something that seemed to irk Black folks during the OJ trial. And I heard a lot of Black women, especially, was Chris Darden. Talk about, if you will, the effect that Chris Darden had on this trial.
Well, number one, he was brought up on, not to say he's not a good attorney or that he wasn't qualified, because he was Black. Simple. They wanted him, they wanted that Black presence on the team, because just the idea of Marsha alone as a white woman coming for a Black man with this jury was not, the optics were not good. They understood that, white women had a bad history coming after Black men just because. So like they brought him in order to dissipate some of that perception. It's like everyone said, the problem is that OJ had money. He had somebody, he had Johnny Cochran. So no matter how many Black guys they would have brought in, Johnny Cochran was just that good of an attorney. And also we got to mention that Johnny Cochran had a history of suing the LAPD. He understood how the LAPD worked. So he had a lot, the inner working. So he wasn't coming into this, as you stated, cold. But the whole idea was that to bring in Christopher Darden was like, okay, so you have a Black man against a Black man, so we can cancel each other out. But Johnny Cochran just had presence also. He's very charismatic. He was a good orator. I'm not an attorney, but I know that in order for you to be a good trial lawyer, you have to be able to command the courtroom. He had confidence. He wasn't letting these people push him around. So all of that, already, people would sit up when long court proceedings. You forgot this was on TV, but when Johnny was on the floor, we all were like leaning forward. We were paying attention, and that is something. Whereas Christopher Darden was more or less like, he was on this crusade, like justice and everything, but he wasn't charismatic. So I feel, I feel a little bad for him, because I feel like he lost before he stepped in the room.
Chris Darden. Well, that when you're going up against a Johnny Cochran, the chips are against you. And one of the things that many may not know is that Johnny Cochran, though he was not on the defense team publicly, he was instrumental in Michael Jackson's acquittal in 2005. He actually was I see him at Neverland. He'd actually direct that team, and he's the one who brought on Tom Mesereau to lead that. And so Johnny Cochran was really, once he got involved, you knew that the defendant now had more than just a puncher's chance of an acquittal. Rashonda, again, the mistakes made. So let's talk about the jury, because they did have 8 Black women on that jury. and the mistakes made was incomprehensible. As Lauren mentioned earlier, too, one of the things that struck me, well, not struck me, but one of the things I believe, other than the glove don't fit, because I think the real thing that lost that case was Mark Furman, and the fact is that you have to, when you plead the fifth, what the jury may not have known, what most people may not have known at that time, is when you plead the fifth, you have to do it on every single question that's asked. And there was a motion, most people
Right.
may or may not remember, from the prosecution to just say, okay, let's just accept that Mark Furman is pleading the fifth and sit him down. Johnny Cochran said, no, we want him on the stand and for him to do it from the stand. We want him to answer these questions. And he asked him a series of questions. And to me, the moment that raised reasonable doubt above all was when, as Lauren said, they asked him the one question: did you plant that glove? And he said, I refuse to answer that question on the grounds that it might incriminate me. That to me, when you get so when you talk about the jury and people criticize the jury, what choice did the jury have, Rashonda?
Right, and that is the bottom line. And again, what white people seem to have forgotten in this trial is that all you need to do is plant a reasonable doubt, and that's what the skilled Johnny Cochran
Plant a
did in
glove.
that moment was planted the reasonable doubt. And so you have these women, especially the black women on the jury. You already have this. We're trying to be objective. We're trying to put aside any of our implicit bias. But here's a reasonable doubt right here. And so that gave them the ammunition they needed to acquit him. And so, it was just a matter of being, as you said, outmatched. And it almost felt like they had never seen Johnny Cochran before, because how did you come in here so illfully prepared to go up against this man?
Well, I'm gonna stick with you for a second, Rashonda, because you're Houston. I'm New York. At the famous or infamous Bronco chase. Um, it happened during, I believe it was, I want to say game 6. No, it wasn't game 6. It was perhaps game 5 of the NBA championship. Knicks and the Houston Rockets, New York Knicks, Houston Rockets. And I remember the Garden, Madison Square Garden, 20,000 folks during an NBA championship game. The Garden appeared half empty because most of the crowd got up and went to the concession stand to watch the chase on television. And NBC of OJ's network, and one of his best friends, Bob Costas, was calling the game. How surreal was that, Rashonda?
That was the beginning of our obsession with watching things play out on the news, and everybody was watching this slow speed chase. And I think it was because it was a new thing. It had been on 24/7, the whole issue of this case, and just to watch that, I just remember, you're rooting for him to get away, but you're like, okay, but this is before we knew all that we know now, because I was one of those in the beginning. OJ didn't do it until he wrote a book that said if I had did it. Uh, but I think it just really was the beginning of being able to see things play out publicly, and everyone was riveted. I remember that they cleared out that stadium for that game.
Yeah, I mean, they went to concession stands because the concession stands had televisions.
Yeah.
And you'd think they probably paid a premium for these NBA Finals tickets, but they were more interested in what was going on free television. So, but it was just so, like, as I said, NBC happened to have been covering or broadcasting the game with Bob Costas, who recently spoke about OJ, but and how he felt finally breaking his silence after all these years on it. But Bob Costas is a very respected commentator. But I want to mention something to Takuma that Power 96 brought out, and that's really part of the point of this program this morning, the effect of the OJ Simpson. And there is they're not fighting over OJ innocence or guilt right there. but but I want to point this out because I think it's very important. And Power 96 mentions that we have not had a majority black jury in a high profile case since. Juror nullification has always been real, but even more real since OJ. I watched it. Look, Lauren covers a lot of these big trials. She mentioned Me Too. I know she's at a lot of those trials. I was at both Cosby's trials. I was at Michael Jackson's trial. And you watch as prosecutions, particularly in the Bill Cosby case. And again, this is not about innocence or guilt. This is just facts. The jury nullification of black folks is as real as ever. I remember being on the phone during the middle Tacoma of the Cosby jury selection and watching as I'm gonna give you one for instance. This black woman police officer from Allegheny County was selected by the Cosby team, and the prosecution had no more strikes, but they objected to her. And then they brought up that she was terminated from her job because she falsified somebody's time card. Turns out, and defense was able to show this, that it was a false allegation. She actually sued Allegheny County over this false allegation and was awarded $3 million, back pay, her job, and everything. But the judge still said, well, just to avoid any impropriety, we're going to dismiss her. Dismissed her. I was on the phone with Jesse Jackson. I said, here in Pittsburgh, we're looking at this in real time, jury nullification. And he said, Stacey, that's something that the civil rights movement fought about. We've been fighting for that all of our lives, and it continues to happen. And he alluded to the fact that the one trial that we didn't have, that was O.J. Simpson. But Power 96 brings up a great point. Since O.J. Simpson, we have not seen that, Takuma.
And I would agree with that, because I'm even thinking of the high-profile cases we have that are going on right now in Atlanta, in particular with Young Thug, the rapper, and the movement that he's associated with. There isn't an all-black jury there, although when you look at Fulton County, the demographics, I'm not sure it's necessarily representative of the area. And that would make a whole lot of sense to me with regard to that. Again, pointing to the phenomenon that was the O.J. Simpson trial, and that it's so rare. And again, with this distance that we've had, being able to see why it mattered so much. And there was something that you alluded to as well, that the O.J. Simpson was really the first glimmers of what we think of as this post-truth society that we live in, where what's true may be obscured by what's more evident or what's more believable, and in accordance with people's biases. And again, we saw that with OJ. We're seeing that with the example you pointed out with jury nullification, and we're seeing it, of course, with 45 right now.
Well, see, I've always, and again, I've always said this about court trials, especially when it comes to black folks. And this is why it was disappointing to me. I understand people's feelings about Bill Cosby, but it was disappointing that more black people wasn't paying attention. Not for Bill Cosby. It's like we didn't cheer for OJ. We cheered for Johnny Cochran. We cheered because those cops got away with beating Rodney King half to death. We cheered because of the Scottsboro boys, I should say. We cheered for Emmett Till when OJ was acquitted. It was, those cheers were for Emmett Till. Those cheers were for the Scottsboro boys and all other black folks who had been done wrong by the justice system. It had nothing to do with OJ Simpson, right? The Cosby thing, I saw so much corruption in that case. Not, again, I'm not speaking to his guilt or innocence, just saying the way it was run. And when we talk about reasonable doubt, that's why it horrifies me, Lauren, when the former Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance, made the comment that when you talk about Me Too, just the mere allegation should be enough for conviction. It's horrifying as a black individual when you go down that path and forget about the process. So they have innocent until proven guilty. OJ was guilty until proven otherwise, just like every other black defendant, but OJ had the resources. And
Well,
many of us
go
don't.
ahead.
Go ahead, Lauren. No,
Yeah,
I want your take.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So I just got finished watching in the courtroom the Jonathan Majors case, all white jury with only one. Actually, I shouldn't say all white jury. One black juror, one black female juror that they tried to kick out because she
Of
was
course.
doing something back there, questioning what was going on, which she should have been. You had the media completely on the side of the accuser, Miss Grace Jabari. And so the media plays the same role as it did when Ida Wells was fighting the media in the late
Yep.
1800s, which is they are part of the, oh my goodness, this person's definitely guilty and we don't really care what the evidence is. So what? There's a video of Miss Jabari chasing Mr. Majors through Manhattan. Big deal. So what the public then sees, and this is why I think we are post-truth at this point, the public is seeing what the media is telling them and believing it because there is no other source. And then they look at it and go, well, this all makes sense because this headline in the New York Times says that Jonathan Majors has a history of this and that. Then when you're sitting in the courtroom, you're seeing all the evidence play out. You're seeing the testimony firsthand. It's as if a different trial is happening. I once heard Reverend Al Sharpton say, and he's right, when you read the black press, it's like reading another version of America, because a lot of times you're in the courtroom and our version of events, particularly when you put it up against history, is got the context with it, which of course the white press is not going to have, particularly the New York Times, particularly NPR, by the way, and particularly Rolling Stone, who was obsessed. Rolling Stone in particular was obsessed with the Majors case. I know the feeling that you had in the Cosby case. I've never been a Bill Cosby fan ever since Pound Cake.
Right. But the thing
Frankly,
about it, Lauren,
I
wait,
know
let me just say this. It's not about
know you're
being a
gonna I know
fan.
you're gonna defend them. I get that
No,
you're
I'm
gonna
not
defend him in
defending him.
courtroom
So
evidence. The courtroom evidence
before
is different
Lauren,
from
before you
liking
go
Bill
on,
Cosby.
let's make it clear. It's not about being a fan. It's not about saying he's guilty. It's not about saying he's innocent. It was about the process, is what I'm talking about. And this is what the O.J. Simpson jury did. They went by the process and got murdered. Pardon the pun, but they in the court of public opinion got murdered because they came back in 4 hours and said not guilty. But they went by what the rules were. The rules said that if you're beyond a reasonable doubt, then you must acquit them.
Yeah.
And
So the
so they got killed
process
for it.
the process in this country has never been fair to African Americans. Anyone who knows anything about history knows that we were never even considered citizens until 300 years into this country. I mean, so the idea that this is all, when we look at cases like the Daniel Perry case or the Kyle Rittenhouse case, Kyle Rittenhouse kills two people, right? Kills
There
two
you go.
people and has a massive, rifle on his shoulder. We all understand that there's no way a black person get away with that. When we see the case with the Breonna Taylor case, not only does Breonna Taylor get killed by the police, they then go into a parking garage and try to cover it up, all of which gets revealed. And then we got to sit here and listen to idiots like Candace Owens tell us that, oh, well, this happened because it was her fault, which is always the magic trick, right? With Trayvon Martin, it happened because it was his fault, because somehow or another he attacked somebody. With Michael Brown, it happened because it was his fault. Any reasonable person understands that when a teenager with no record whatsoever, by the way, gets shot 8 times, 5 times of which are in the back, there's something wrong with that story. Now, that's a history that we as African Americans have had to deal with for 405 years. White folks don't have to consider any of these things when stuff happens in their lives. We're the ones that have to consider this type of history. And with OJ, that's why it also culminates in OJ. It also too culminates in these present day trials, because quite frankly, I thought the Majors case, if you took a picture of that courtroom, almost all white press corps. Only on the day that the verdict came out, did I see 2 black reporters. Completely white press
Once
corps, almost
again,
a completely white jury in Manhattan, a city with
in Manhattan.
2 million, 2 million black folks sitting around, and nobody even writes about that in the media. Nobody even
Same,
noticed any of it. It's amazing.
same with Cosby. And again, Erica Dixon saying pound cake. And see, the problem I have with that, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this at all. Problem I have with that is, fine, you want to be mad at him, but here's the thing: you want to be mad at the pound cake speech, and you have every right to be, right? But here's the thing with that. The point is not about what it's about black and white here, right? This black man had the resources and still they recognized that he had the resources. And so the judge was determined this was not going to be another OJ case. The judge was determined that he was going to stack the deck against this black defendant. That's the concern, not that Bill Cosby was Bill Cosby, not that he said a pound cake speech that dissed us all in front of white folks. Not that doesn't matter. But Katia, what does matter is this process, this the law that the jury in the OJ case, right? One of the jurors said, look, the guy said he pled the fifth on he said he couldn't answer the question about whether he planted the glove or not. So in other words, he planted the glove. That's enough reason for that. The other cop took blood home with him for the weekend. And then this blood gets smeared in different places that is questionable. That's reasonable doubt. So you had a situation where finally a black defendant led by a powerful black lawyer was able to win in a system rigged against them. One of the things that Gil Garcetti, the district attorney, said to me, the Los Angeles district attorney said to me some years later after the trial, was that I asked him, well, the crime was committed in Santa Monica, Lily White, Santa Monica, because as Takuma pointed out, OJ lived in Brentwood, and he was, $1 million homes and stuff like that. Why did you move the case to downtown Los Angeles? Totally different jury pool. I said, I believe you wanted a black or minority jury to convict him. And he said, well, no, that wasn't necessarily the case. This is his words. He said, we needed to accommodate the media and there was work being done at the Santa Monica courthouse. I couldn't believe he said that, for the record. So I think you have a situation here where in the OJ case too, so many factors, as we've already discussed. All of the Rodney King thing was certainly huge, the Rodney King situation. But these other factors, the mistakes that Lauren pointed out, the craziness that she pointed out with Furman and Darden and the glove. But you also had the decision from the decision maker, the district attorney himself, moving that trial to Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles. That was big, Katia, don't you think?
Well, 100%. But let's also say that it's been the other way. When the officers that, beat up Rodney King, they took it to a county that favored them.
Simi Valley.
So, and we knew that once they did that, they were going to go free because, at the time, and probably still now, we knew that white people weren't going to convict the police. Like the odds were against it. But I do want to say one thing in terms of jury pool, right? Absolutely. I agree with what everyone said, but we also as Black people have to show up when we are called to serve. I know way too many people that are registered voters that when it's time to show up to be on someone's jury, that are like, ooh, I want to get out of it. I don't want to be bothered. I have things to do. Well, you can't complain about the system and what it does if you don't show up and do your part as a citizen. That is also a responsibility that we have. If we don't like what's going on with the court system, we got to show up. And there are a lot of people who probably would make juries that aren't going because they don't want to get paid a little bit. They don't want to get caught up in something like that. So I think that is something that we have to discuss a little bit more. Why is it that on the one hand, we know what the justice system is, but then when we have an opportunity, as you all stated, it was fought so hard for us to be able to have a voice, be able to vote, to be able to have all of these so-called rights. We also act like, oh man, I can't, I don't want to be away from my house. I don't want to be bothered. You got to show up to be counted. You got to show up to be in those things. And I agree, with that Jonathan Majors case, it was just, because it's Hollywood is very weird. We can name a whole bunch of people that have done a whole heap of mess where Hollywood is like, okay, come on in. Mel Gibson comes to mind. And Jonathan Majors, who was, it's a misdemeanor, and now it's like, he's all of a sudden an abuser, he's this, he's that. And also social media acts and all of that. I can't even think what the world would have been like if we had social media during the OJ trial.
Like Tacoma's shaking his head.
It's all of these things, where you have to kind of like pause and say, wait a minute, let's look at the facts, let's look at the thing. And I think that's all of those things, where I think that's where responsible journalism comes in. Not me. I always like to, these days I'm always saying, well, yes, there's media, and underneath media there's journalism, and that's what everybody else is doing, the podcast bros. So it's our responsibility to kind of like, I know it's a struggle, to say, hey, these are the facts, not the feelings, not the clicks.
Yep.
This is what we can prove, and this is what the situation is. So I think we have a tremendous responsibility as journalists to call out the inaccuracies, even when it's our own people. It'd be our own people that'll be out there telling the alternative facts. So I think all of those things matter. I think it's really important when we tell these stories, especially what's going on with 45, hey, we know why certain people feel the way that they do when we know the truth. So I think, again, as far as jury pool, we have to say, are we doing our part when our card is punched? Are we showing up? And a lot of people will sadly tell you, well, I'm thinking of 15 million different excuses on how I can get out of this, instead of saying, you know what, let me take this serious and show up and be counted.
Rashonda, Mike V says this, and I think you'd be great to respond to this. He says Black folks aren't showing up, talking about for jury selections, because the court is a source of generational trauma.
Yeah, that is absolutely spot on. One of the things that I just don't think we realize the importance of being down at the courthouse, is showing up to serve on these juries. We don't realize the long-term importance of that. But that is so correct, because we know some people that go to court and their lives are changed drastically. All of us have someone in our families who have had their lives altered by a courthouse. So it is years of generational trauma from showing up and being at the courthouse. Most of the Black people I know are like, nah, I'm good. I stay away from the courthouse by all means. And so, you really look at how that affects us on the other side. But that is accurate on all levels.
Yeah, and David Youngblood is saying the court is a no-go space. Nothing good happens for us there. So it kind of backs up what you were saying there and what Mike V was saying. Takuma, Greer asked a question, and I guess everybody can chime in, but we'll start with Takuma. She says, how do you feel about Marsha Clark, her attitude about being a Black women whisperer? She clearly overplayed her hand. I think there's also the attitude that we can be controlled.
The we can be controlled part, are we talking about the perception of our perceptions being changed because of whiteness and being adjacent to Black people and being favorable toward Black people? I'm trying to understand the context of that question.
Yeah, and she says yes. he's like the thinking man over there.
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to come up with an example here that fits that, and I have to think about that a little bit more. I'd like to defer to my other.
Sure. Go ahead, ladies.
Yeah, I think Marsha really, again, that it just shows how much she was not up to the task. The entire team, as we said earlier, I think they thought, well, Christopher will handle the Black part, and Marsha will appeal to these as a woman. And at the end of the day, they're sitting in this courtroom, and we like a show, and Johnny gave a show. So Marsha could have whispered all she wanted, but those Black women were looking at the show Johnny was putting on.
Yeah, and Lauren, wasn't that offensive? What Rashonda just truthfully stated, that Christopher Darden was there for the black part. Isn't that offensive in some way?
Um, yeah, they should have put their best folks up there. I don't want to imply that because he was black, he wasn't the best attorney, because I don't know who else was in their office at the time.
Right.
But so they did need to put their best there. You see Alan Dershowitz and Johnny Cochran and F. Lee Bailey coming in a big case that is going to involve a celebrity and be all over the place on TV. You do want to put people up there who's the best in your office at the time. I really don't know who that was. We only saw, of course, Marcia Clark and Chris Darden. To go back though on the subject of facts and the media, I think one of the reasons why things are so complicated now, of course, the media has a huge challenge of misinformation and disinformation, particularly put on media platforms that uh, have no responsibility with regard under the defamation laws as they stand now. Anybody can sort of write anything they want, and these media platforms are protected by Section 230. But more importantly, we have a press corps, particularly younger members of the press, that want their feelings in the stories rather than the facts.
All the
And
time.
I've gone up against this many times where you have certain facts in a story, particularly if we're dealing with somebody who's black, because oftentimes the dynamic is this, the defendant is black, the press corps is white, the press corps went to Wellesley and Hamilton College and don't have no relationship whatsoever to the black community. And you're having to be the whisperer of that case to some member of the press. It's not only have I been a member of the press, I've been a crisis manager. And that has been a fascinating experience. And as you can see with this argument going on with NPR in the background, even though I don't particularly agree with everything that Uri Berliner had to say, he made some really good points, because what's happening now is people want their narrative, they want a story, they want to advocate, they want to be political rather than just giving the public the facts. And the public can see it. The public can see the politics behind a lot of these stories, whether they're on the right or the left, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC, they can see it. And that is killing the media right now. Absolutely killing the media, because we saw it in the Johnny Depp situation where random people on YouTube were giving more facts and more details about the case than the media was, for political reasons, because NBC and CBS wanted Amber Heard to be a hero instead of just telling the public what the facts of the case were. And the facts of these cases a lot of times are very complicated, particularly when we have men and women in a marriage. Usually what you find is that there's mistakes and foolish behavior on both sides of that equation. And then the media wants to report it as the woman is the hero and the and the man is the villain in every single case, particularly in the Me Too setting. So that is killing the media, in my view. This whole thing, this thing toward opinion, I think the Root has become, frankly, an anti-black platform. If you just go read the
The
headlines,
root?
you'll
Oh,
believe it.
without question.
The
Oh my
Root. We could have
gosh.
a whole episode on the Root, because the
Oh
Root has
gosh.
become strange. The Root has
The,
become strange in
it-
terms of what they're
the
putting out
root
there.
is
And so I
totally
would just say,
anti-black, especially
yeah,
anti-black men.
right,
There's no
exactly.
question
And so
about it.
that's become almost dangerous. I mean, it's become
Yeah,
strange.
very much
I mean,
so.
what
Very much
other
so.
group of people has a platform where, what other ethnic group or religious group or anything else in the country has a news platform that's supposed to be about their group that's negative about their group? What group would that be? So the Root has become strange. And so we're in sort of a battle, an information battle. We realize AI is scraping the internet for all this information. So what we feed into that matters. And that's becoming huge, because if AI wins the court case with regard to the information they can scrape off the internet and amalgamate into Chat GPT and everything else, that means that all this misinformation is part of that equation. So we have to be thinking
Yeah.
strategically as Black folks in a way that no other group has to think, because our history is the one that gets attacked and buried and changed, and all these other games that are happening around the country.
So, Katia, the again, the mindset of the culture. This is a moment that happened that really brought the culture to the forefront. Dive into that just a little bit more. We talked about the atmosphere, what was going on at the time. What's the lasting effect on the culture of O.J. Simpson in that trial of the century?
You can't. I say this all the time and people don't quite get it. Like, I think we see it when people have this adverse effect. on how they feel about Oprah. Like they'll blame stuff on her that is just ludicrous, right? Where you're just like, what is wrong with you? If you're a logical person, people think that if you are a Black person with money, or some people that do have money think that all of a sudden erases your Blackness. You now get a fair shot. You're now part of the status quo. And OJ proved that when you're a Black person with money, you're still Black. Did the word did erase that? And I think, I think unlike OJ, Oprah gets that. She's often talked about how she's been denied, she's been questioned, she can afford things, she's been turned away from places, and that's Oprah Winfrey. So, if Oprah Winfrey is getting these doors, what is it that people say the difference between racism when you're broke and when you're rich is it's just more passive, but it's still there. You know what I mean? It's not directly in your face. So I think that's the thing is, understand that no amount of success, you can marry whoever you're going to marry. You can be this poster child. You can have this perfect image. I think we see it a little bit, not to say that Will Smith is someone that doesn't stand firmly in his Blackness, but we saw that, when he had a moment, of a lapse in judgment, and all of a sudden this man went from slapping someone to all of a sudden being a thug, being an abuser, being a criminal, all these things. And you're like, wait a minute, did we see the same thing? And people wanting him kicked out, and we're all like, well, wait a minute, but if we're kicking Will out, there's a slew of people that are still welcomed at these things that have convictions and abuses and criminal charges, and the list goes on and on. So I think that's the case that we have to remember as Black people. No matter how much money we have better resources. Like everyone stated, we can fight things a little bit better. We give ourselves a fighting chance, but we're always going to be Black first, no matter where you live, no matter who you marry, no matter who your friends are, what country club membership you have. The world is always going to remind you that you are Black first, second, third, and last.
And Rashonda, when you think about the reaction from how it was split totally down the middle, white and Black, and you think about, as has been mentioned, the Trump situation today, Power 96 has reminded me that he predicted there would be no more than 2 Black jurors on that case, and I owe him 30 pounds of crawfish because of it. But when you think about the fact that the country today, now more so than ever, we saw it vividly when the OJ verdict was announced. The comments from white folks, even in that clip earlier that Greer played with the white woman saying it's about race, but for Black folks, and now today it's more in our face with since the really since Obama was in office, but certainly more so since Trump came on the scene as a heavyweight politician. We see this divide, and there's nothing to suggest that it's going to get better.
Right. And unfortunately, there's still so much that needs to be done in understanding and in having them understand where we're coming from, understanding the races, and you continue to have things that polarize. Especially as Lauren said earlier, the white community who, when they feel like they have been wronged in any way, they try to wipe out history by banning books. They try to go critical race theory. And so we have that challenge, and we've got to continue fighting against it, because for our children, especially, if they remain ignorant of the injustices of the past, and they will grow up thinking they don't need to see each other through a tainted lens of history or politics, and they're going to be doomed to repeat it. And so it is our job as journalists to continue telling our stories and being vocal. You guys mentioned the root. I thought it was just me noticing the change at the root. I was like, what is going on? But it is crucial that we call it out and we continue to stand on our own principles.
Yeah, and Takuma, I don't know if you've seen the whole thing with the root too that we're talking about, But that's, I think Rashonda brought up a great point. And, Lauren kicked it off. The root is certainly anti-Black, has become anti-Black for some odd reason. But this telling the stories, not only do we must continue to tell the stories, Katia knows it too, that we've been telling the stories. Certainly Black owned press has been telling the story, but how do we get folks to really pay attention? Because we are telling the stories.
Yeah, and getting back to the lessons to bring it full circle about the impact of the OJ trial as the dominant television event that it became. I think what's clear is that since that event, we realized the importance of multidimensional communication in the sense of you can appeal to the logic of people all you want. The prosecution may have had the best laid plans factually about why their case stood up, but when it comes to the theater and being able to appeal to somebody at a very primordial level, base level, that still matters. And it's why we have the famous phrase, the gloves don't fit, why that still echoes, because Johnny Cochran knew that televised courtroom was about theater. Uh, 45 knows that politics is about theater. So
Right.
again, when we talk about being in this post-truth society and our responsibility as journalists, how do we cut through the noise using facts, but using a method of communication that really gets at the root of people and makes a lasting impact?
Yeah. And Lauren, I'll give you the last thought on that. I know you look like you had some thoughts on that.
I think that yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things going on. One is that obviously technology has completely changed, and it has given everybody the platform really on an equal basis in terms of anybody can get on anything and broadcast and blow up. I mean, and actually blow up and get a lot of audience. And so, obviously, the environment has changed toward this value of audience for audience sake, no matter how irrelevant the subject matter may be. And the media is struggling to catch up to that, because what has happened now is the media is, of course, competing with anyone who has a cell phone at any given place in time, who could report what happens right in front of them at any given place in time. So the media is competing against that, and competing against the fact that people's attention is divided by everything from gaming to folks on YouTube who may or may not have a relevant opinion. And then that environment, the media has decided, I think most of the press has decided, that it really doesn't matter what it takes to get the clicks and the attention to the website. We are going to put that on. And so facts are taking a back seat to feelings and to emotion. And of course, the fact that Facebook had discovered that to get people emotional and angry was the way that you got traffic, and now the media is duplicating that strategy. And that is all bad news, generally speaking, for Black people, unless, of course, we own and control our own platforms. I keep telling my friends in media to stop arguing in these newsrooms, with these white folks that control the game, because they do not know our history. To the extent they do know it, they don't care. And when they do know it, that doesn't mean they're going to amplify it in the same way that we would amplify our own story when we tell it. So it's a completely different thing when you're telling your own story. They're telling their story, right? They're telling their story, and we need to counter that by telling our story and stop wasting time and build platforms. As you can see with things like Club Shay Shay and a few other topics. And I know, a lot of people might not consider Shannon Sharpe a particularly good example, because he is doing entertainment and not hard news. But I would argue that one of the reasons why Shannon Sharpe has blown up is because he is talking to a constituency that everybody ignores, which is, generally speaking, Black men. He talks to a lot of Black men on his show. He himself is a Black male. He is a not just an average football player. I think he has 3 or 4 Super Bowl rings. He is a Hall of Fame, level player. So everybody knew who he was from the jump. And because of that, he is able to gain millions and millions and millions of people. I think that there is certainly a Black woman out there who could do the same exact thing and who will do the same exact thing and amplify the topics that she feels are important as well. But because the media completely ignores Black men and doesn't hire them into any of the newsrooms I've worked in, whether it was USA Today or ABC News or anything else, things like the OJ case and John Majors. I know a lot of people want to quote the Malcolm X quote, and I totally get that as a Black woman. But my view of it has always been that Black men have been the ones that everybody talks about and vilifies, but doesn't actually hire. So they don't have a seat at the table. So what we're seeing as a constituency, Black people more generally, broadly, and Black males more specifically in the case of Shannon Sharpe, having an audience and blowing up and making money with that audience. And that is what we have to do as Black folks. I'm hoping some Black woman comes along and does the exact same thing Shannon Sharpe does. I think that will happen. Certainly Beyonce could do it at the the drop of a hat, but she's busy with a lot of other things. But I'm just saying that we as Black folks have to own and control our platforms and our story, because if we don't do that, we're going to have other people deciding what the narrative is. And that has been a disaster from the beginning of the printed press about 200 years ago.
May I just jump in for 1 second? I think I understand. I agree to a certain extent. That's why I always say is the problem isn't Black. The problem is that we now lump everybody in under this umbrella of Black media. The issue with the root is it's not Black owned. It's Black facing. Same thing with Complex. The other thing too is with someone like a Shannon Sharpe. That's entertainment for a kiki, and it's where you get your tea. My problem is there's nothing wrong with having Shannon Sharpe. We're going to Shannon Sharpe to get journalism, to get news, which is the problem that we're having as Black people. We have a gazillion Black responsible platforms. We all contribute to those platforms. The problem is we, the public, don't support those places. We're supporting the kikis. And therefore, the kikis now think they are journalism news places. They think they're like Time Magazine, which they're not. So the key is we have those places. And the reason why we're in those white newsrooms is because the Black spaces can't afford to hire us. They don't have the resources to keep us on there full time. So if we want to have Black journalism, right? And I want to stress journalism because what our colleagues are doing is entertainment. It's for clicks. It's for clout. It's not necessarily for informing and uplifting, especially this election cycle. Then we must contribute as well as Madison Avenue. These things are out here. It's not that hard. We don't have to create new things. You have to support the things that exist. And I ask these questions all the time of my friends. If you're so bothered by the Breakfast Club and the Root and the list goes on, are you subscribed to your local Black newspaper? Are you supporting Black journalism spaces? If the answer is no, then you're part of the problem. That's the conversation we've been having. The funding is what's missing to enable us to be able to compete in this news cycle and going out and doing the same misinformation craziness that the mainstream is doing by clickbaiting or uplifting the shade room. I'm extremely bothered by this White House inviting, Hollywood Unlocked and the shade room to be part of anything to do with journalism and the journalism space.
Yeah,
it's extremely bothersome for those of us that do the job. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like I pride myself on being a good journalist, on writing on facts. And even though my beat is mainly entertainment, it is still journalism. I still don't go in there and give people the tea. It is based on, we were talking about Jonathan Majors. It's picking up the phone and telling the facts about what is going on with this man and why he's getting railroaded compared to all these other folks. So I think we have to challenge this audience that watches this. Are you helping? Are you subscribing? Are you supporting? Are you retweeting just the shade room? The shade room doesn't need your help. Are you retweeting this program? Are you subscribing? Are you donating? If we all gave, $10 a month, it will make a world of difference in some of these newsrooms. So I would say if you don't like, and if you want to be part of the solution, you got to start supporting the platforms that are out there, and you got to start supporting the work of Black journalists that are doing the work, period.
I think we always have to remember, though, that no matter what we're talking about, no matter what the subject matter is, there's
Mhm.
two things you always have to have. You have to have audience and you have to have money. You have to have money coming in. So that reaction to entertainment is really about the fact that entertainment and sports, which is really entertainment, bring the money. That's why the
Right.
Shannon Sharp thing is blowing up, for example.
Yeah.
So until somebody figures out the code of how you can attract people, and I think there's a medium there where you can kind of do a chicken and an egg. You can do some entertainment. Breakfast Club actually does a fairly good job of this. They'll do entertainment and then they'll do hard news. I think sometimes with them the problem is the
They're
folks
not
they have on
qualified.
are not necessarily deep enough to really get to the place where we want, that hard news to be. But nonetheless, they're doing the entertainment to get the audience, and then they're hitting us with some hard, important topics. And who they do that with, I think, is where the key is. But it's a difficult conundrum because you do have to have that audience, but you have to make money. And making
Yeah.
money a lot of times goes back to the entertainment piece.
Yeah. And but Rashonda, with that said, the um, the training of folks' mind when it comes to news now seems to be that they've now been trained to go to these alternative sites, these blogs and things like that. How do you undo that is really, I think, the challenge.
Yeah, it's one we constantly face because we have an uphill battle because people continue to think we're a recycling of press releases, and so we just have to continue doing the stories that we do, and it's all in the promotion as well. It dumbfounds us that we've been a staple in the Houston community for so long, and we can easily go to a Black event and half the people there have never even heard of us. And so it is an ongoing challenge. One of the things we're doing, though, is we're doing a lot of media partnerships, trying to get out in front. We work with the Fox station and the NBC station in Houston, trying to get out in front of people so that they can see we're an alternative to the daily news that they're getting. And we're looking at things that matter to them. And I think that's just we just have to keep going and not give up, and then find other ways to promote it and let people know, hey, we're here.
Yeah. What are you doing in Chicago, Takuma?
And that was a really good point about it's this battle between vegetables and candy, right? Essentially, when you talk about the entertainment news versus the more substantive things. And the thing that I have to deal with daily is that, for example, we have a upcoming series of stories about to publish on Monday about how historical segregation in Chicago has fathered the epidemic of Black homelessness here in Chicago as well. But this is a very meaty, very substantive piece that the reality is that if it isn't it probably won't be as well read or attract the viewers that we would get for some of our stuff that we do on Instagram. But we understand that that's part of the equation now, that you have to speak to a younger demographic through Instagram Reels. So there's this constant balancing between informing people of community news, talking about substantive issues, and also doing a reel about what Chance the Rapper did at the United Center, or Angel Reese and Camila Cardoso joining the Chicago Sky. That's all a part of what we have to utilize to get news out. And I think that we have to remain true to who we are as the Chicago Defender, which is about to turn 119 years old on May 5th. Happy birthday for us. We have to continue to speak to those historical issues that have long plagued Black Chicago, but at the same time, we have to appeal to this younger demographic. So it's a constant dance. And so that's what we're doing. We are taking a multi-pronged approach in terms of storytelling. And I think that we have to value the entertainment, the candy, but we also have to use the candy to fund the vegetables.
David
Mhm.
Youngblood says that he thinks more personal appearances by members of this panel, you guys, on alternative platforms as personalities may help to increase our own platform numbers. Um, that might be certainly a way to go. I know Lauren has she's a part of the very high profile Roland Martin Unfiltered, and Rashonda and her uh, book tours and everything else she does, movies and things of that nature. And of course, Katia is I find Katia everywhere on when I look at social media. I mean, it's like she's in demand. So yeah, I agree with that. David says, I see you everywhere, Lauren. Real quick, we got 5 minutes left. Let me ask this question as we started obviously mostly about OJ and as Greer says, people forget we got to eat too. But the family of Ronald Goldman, Fred Goldman to be specific, has for since 1994 has gone after OJ Simpson. There was a judgment, $33.5 million. Estimates with interest and everything now he perhaps owes about $200 million to Fred Goldman, who's been chasing after this for 30 years. His estate executor initially said Fred is not getting anything. Now he says he'll work with them. What's your thoughts? And let's go around the table. Takuma, Lauren, Katia, and then Rashonda. Your thoughts on this as they go through OJ's estate to try to put a value on it and see what's left, see what he's had. What's your thought on the situation with the Goldmans? Because the Browns really have not pursued any type of the way Fred Goldman has. They have not. The Browns have not pursued this.
Yeah. So we began this program talking about how OJ was the exception. And I think that we see, based on the memorabilia case that occurred years later, that he is indeed a black man. And he got reminded by the criminal justice, or excuse me, the court system in general about who he is. And this was the recompense, right? And so to me, that's what, when you look at the trial and you look at the events that happened after that, he was able to secure a historic win. I do happen to think that he participated in the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Goldman, but I also think that you know what ultimately is said with this memorabilia case, as specious as that case was that there's recompense coming and that you can enjoy our privilege, but the reckoning will come. And we saw that reckoning, and it will continue once that settlement is paid out. That 33, I think it's 33 million or 30 million.
33.5 million, but now with the interest is up to about 184 million or something of that nature.
And he may very well be successful in recovering a portion of that, if not more.
Yeah, there's nothing more indicative of the phrase, do Black Lives Matter than this part of the discussion. First of all, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. So why are we discussing? And there was a civil case in which there was a substantial amount of money awarded, even though he was found not guilty. Okay, in a world where we are openly discussing things like qualified, we're discussing things like, whether or not a city should pay out when a cop shoots somebody in the back 3 times, and then we find out, oh, that's right, they got $1 million, or $2 million. But on this case, they got 33 million, and now we're back again with another discussion. So I'm confused. I have to consult some of my attorney friends because I've worked.
Well, they never received the money. The 33,
okay,
they never got the judgment.
Well, they got a judgment of 33 million bucks. So someone out there decided that the lives of those 2 people were worth 33 million dollars after the defendant was found not guilty, which is unheard of, by the way. Because typically what would happen is you'd turn around and say, well, he was found not guilty, so where is there any proof that there's a wrongful death case here on a civil level? So of course, because everyone's black on the defendant's side, all of that goes out the window because you've never heard that ever happened before, anytime, any place, right? So if this was two black victims and a white person who, allegedly killed them, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So I'm confused as to why we're even discussing this. I don't know that I would go as hard as OJ's estate as to come out with a statement 5 seconds after OJ's death to tell everybody, oh, they're not going to get a dime. I do think OJ did this. So I think it is not, surprising that Ron Goldman's father is still talking about this. I think he should be, as any father would be had they lost their
That's
son in
yeah.
such a violent way. I mean, I think he has every
That's
right to do
that's
that.
where
I'm just saying, what?
right, and that's where I think about it too as a father, and I think about it too this way.
Right.
I don't know that because to me, and again, this is just me. It has come off that it's all about the money and not the punishment for Ron Goldman. That's how for Fred Goldman. That's how I see it. I could be 100% wrong, because
Well, I'll tell you this. I've been part of legal teams where I was the communications person in a wrongful death case involving police and stuff like that. It is about the money. Somebody's life ended when it should not have ended, and somebody's got to pay for that, quite frankly. So yes, it is about the money. I know in the Black community we have this, for some reason, I'm not sure what it is. I think it's because we sit in church a lot and hear things like money's the root of all evil and stuff like that. At the end of the day, it is about the money. You have taken somebody's life. You've caused pain in that family. You have now destroyed the life of that family by a male member of the family or female member of the family. Breonna Taylor should not be dead. That family should have gotten millions and millions of dollars, right? And I think they got 12 million. That's a big deal to lose somebody's life that should be here. So yeah, it is about the money. So I'm not mad at Fred Goldman. He's right. Ron Goldman's father. He would be saying stuff like any other parent would. That's not a problem. I'm just confused because it's very rare that you hear a situation where somebody's found not guilty and we're still sitting here talking about after they won.
Well, the civil cause, the civil case, of course, was an all-white jury, and of course, civil. They say the burden of proof is a lot less in the civil. But go ahead, Katia.
I mean, I think with the Browns, it's a little more complicated because there are children involved. They're related, right? You have their mother was murdered by their father, and they have siblings, that older siblings. They're all family, so they don't want to cause any more damage to the kids. So I think that's why you don't see the Browns as active. I think the daughter, is the one that's had the hardest time, just living and being present, because her brother being murdered, I can't even relate. And I'm even going to try to pretend, I hope that every time I see her, I'm like, I hope she has therapy, because it seems like she has been stuck, her marriage, everything. She has not been able to commit to things. She has children. Has this young lived at all? Do you know what I mean? And I think for the Goldmans, it's a lot. It's the frustration that they feel like he got to walk around. But I hope him being dead kind of helps them move forward, because there is not that visual reminder of him walking around, him playing golf. It's not for me to say whether or not they should have money, but I do think at some point you have to say to yourself, this is something god awful that happened to us. How do we live? How do we move forward? Let's use this money to do some good, let's help some victims or whatever the case can be. But I hope that him being dead helps them move forward. It will never give them closure, because the result is, he's not going to, they never got what they went to get. But I do think that, hopefully that family can move a little bit forward and live and be present, have joy, a little bit of joy.
Rashonda?
Let me preface this by saying that the deaths of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson were very tragic. And I do hope that the families find healing. There is a part of me that feels some kind of way, because had Ron Goldman been a young Black man who was accused of being a drug dealer, the narrative would have been different. And so that is another journey we have to tackle in this world, the painting of victims. And it really saddens me that has been a race that has not, that's very rarely addressed, as it should be. I just would like to see our young Black men who are victims of crimes be painted with that same brush.
Well, there you have it. The lasting legacy of the trial of the century. I think we all agree that the um, outcome, the cheers were more for Johnny Cochran and more for Black folks as a whole than they were for O.J. Simpson, the defendant. Whether you believe he's innocent or guilty, that was about Johnny Cochran. That was about Black folks. That was about, as we said at the top, um, Emmett Till, boys. It was about Rodney King. It was about justice finally being on the side of African Americans. And that's where we will leave it this morning. Lauren Burke, y'all got to check out. Everyone's asking about Lauren's social media. Everyone's asking about Katia's social media, all your social medias. So if you don't mind, just take 10 seconds. How can people find you on social media?
It's just at LV Burke on X, and I have a YouTube account, which this is actually running through right now, which is my name. That's pretty easily searched. If you search my name, all of that'll come.
And Black Virginia News.
And Black Virginia News. Yeah, that's a team. That's like 3 or 4 people, and I'm the publisher of Black Virginia News. On Substack. I highly recommend Substack, by the way. It's a great thing.
Tacoma, social media?
Well, I like to again prop up ChicagoDefender.com, ChicagoDefender1word.com. We're out here, we're in these streets, trying to bring that news about Chicago and beyond. And then I'm on X, working to generate my presence a little bit more on there. But you can find me at Tacuma Road, TACU, M as in money, AROE is my handle.
Great. Natalie Ferreira loves your voice, Tacuma, by the way. Katia, where can we find you on social media?
I'm easy to find. It's KATHIA_Woods. I'm the same thing on everything. You can find me on Instagram, even TikTok and everything. And as far as my personal interviews, things you want to see me talking to Hollywood, it's on Cup of Soul show. And then, as always, you can read my writing at the Philadelphia Tribune, and hopefully we'll see some of you in Chicago this summer when NABJ invades, Tacoma. Mm-hmm. I'm open to good food places. We like good food.
I got them for you.
Rashonda, where can we find you on social media?
Same thing, Rashonda_Tate, and then thedefendernetwork.com. And I'm on X, but my other personality is on X. Don't look for the objective journalist over there.
I think we all are that.
Yeah.
And I love the fact, listen, the platform now has made it that we like to agitate the owner just to,
Yeah. I could never serve on a Trump jury. They would totally pull up my X account.
Yeah, just think us back a little bit. I think it's only right.
All right.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks so much. This great panel this morning. Some great journalists. It's good to see fantastic, top-notch Black journalists all in one place. Thanks again, Lauren, Tacuma, Katia, and Rashonda. And thank you all for joining Let It Be Known. Have a safe weekend. And let's go Knicks. We'll see you Monday.
All right.